Im Namen des Volkes. Erstens.
The Federal Constitutional Court, Guardian of the Constitution.
Absatz 1 in Verbindung mit Artikel 2 Absatz 2 Satz 1 des Grundgesetzes unvereinbar.
Discover some of the court's landmark decisions. The Federal Constitutional Court ensures respect for fundamental rights. Anyone who believes that their rights have been violated by public authority can lodge a complaint with the court. The Federal Constitutional Court not only decides big cases, but also cases dealing with everyday matters, such as feeding pigeons in public places and access to football stadiums. Yet some of its decisions do involve existential questions. In 2010, the so-called Hartz IV Act raises the issue of an existential minimum. What means does a person need for a life in dignity? This touches upon the first sentence of the Basic Law: human dignity is inviolable. The Federal Constitutional Court decides that the social benefits granted at the time
are incompatible with Article 1, Section 1 of the Basic Law, in conjunction with the principle of the social state under Article 20, Section 1 of the Basic Law.
The court held that the amount of benefits had not been determined in a transparent and realistic manner. It called upon the legislator to come up with a new and better method to determine the means a person needs. The judgment particularly emphasizes the needs of children. At the time, their benefits were derived from the standard rate granted to adults. In its judgment, the court held, children are not small adults. As a result, benefits for children are now determined on the basis of their own child-specific needs. The Federal Constitutional Court often acts as an arbitrator between constitutional organs. If there is a dispute between two state organs, the justices of the Federal Constitutional Court decide on their rights and obligations. In 1994, the court was called upon to decide such a dispute. The federal government had decided to deploy troops abroad without prior approval of the Bundestag. Is that allowed? The court highlighted the important role of Parliament, finding that the government must seek parliamentary approval in such cases. The Bundeswehr is an army controlled by Parliament.
Das Grundgesetz verpflichtet die Bundesregierung für einen Einsatz bewaffneter Streitkräfte, die grundsätzlich vorherige konstitutive Zustimmung des Deutschen Bundestags einzuholen.
In numerous cases, the Federal Constitutional Court has clarified the relationship between Parliament and the government, reiterating that far-reaching political decisions must be taken by the representatives of the people, by the Bundestag. With its decisions, the Federal Constitutional Court has strengthened the democratic culture in both Germany and Europe. Free public debate is made possible by the fundamental rights of freedom of assembly and freedom of expression, which are enshrined in the Basic Law. In many decisions, the Federal Constitutional Court has strengthened these fundamental rights, which are essential to democracy. In 1976, construction for a new nuclear power plant in Brokdorf, Schleswig-Holstein began. Many people protested against this plant for years.
Herr Polizeirat Wösner, all die Demonstranten, die dort sitzen, haben beschlossen, gewaltfrei und friedlich Widerstand zu leisten.
When more than 50,000 people were expected to take part in a protest in February 1981, the district official banned all assemblies in an area covering 210 square kilometers. The organizers of the protest lodged a constitutional complaint with the Federal Constitutional Court, and their complaint was granted. The right to assemble freely with others without any permission by the state has always been a
sign of the freedom, independence, and empowerment of self-confident citizens.
This decision laid down rules for German authorities on how to deal with assemblies, particularly with mass protests in the future. It also strengthens the right of citizens to freely express their opinion together with others. Society is constantly changing. The case law of the Federal Constitutional Court must reflect these changes. The Basic Law guarantees equal rights for men and women. Yet it took a long time before this guarantee has also changed social realities. In 1958, the German Civil Code still provided,
if the parents are unable to agree in matters concerning the child, the father shall decide. The father is entitled to represent the child.
The Federal Constitutional Court declared both provisions to be unconstitutional. It thus gave effect to equality between men and women. Time and again, the Federal Constitutional Court is called upon to decide controversial issues which are the subject of heated debate in society. In 1975 and in 1993, the ban on abortion stirred up controversy.
Paragraph 218a Absatz 1 des Strafgesetzbuchs in der Fassung des Schwangeren- und Familienhütegesetzes ist insoweit mit Artikel 1 Absatz 1 in Verbindung mit Artikel 2 Absatz 2 Satz 1 des Grundgesetzes unvereinbar.
Following these decisions, the law on abortion was changed, and the legal framework shaped back then essentially still applies today. In its interpretation of the Basic Law, the Federal Constitutional Court must keep in touch with the realities of modern society. Several of its decisions ensure that gay and lesbian couples are granted equal rights. Freedom and security are two legal interests that must be protected by the state. The threat posed by terrorism has increased the need for security worldwide. By reacting to these threats, the legislator creates interferences with citizens' freedom. This conflict between freedom and security is often at issue in proceedings before the Federal Constitutional Court. Individual citizens sought and achieved amendments of the legislation in question. In particular, the court's case law has shaped data protection law and the protection of personal computers. The Basic Law guarantees the protection of one's personality, including in the private sphere. This also encompasses the confidentiality of one's own data, protecting citizens from being spied on by the state. In 2014, the Court of Justice of the European Union recognized this principle at the European level. Now, all over Europe, data must not be stored without effective personality protection. The court must adopt a modern interpretation of the Basic Law if the Constitution is not to be a hollow promise. With such an interpretation, the Federal Constitutional Court in Karlsruhe brings fundamental rights protection into the 21st century.